Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, and it also gets uploaded as a YouTube video under the YouTube channel of Zenitsu, while also being posted on various different podcasting platforms. Today, I'm with my co-host Teddy, and we're going to be talking about our thoughts on the BT13 pre-release after playing in some, on top of the creative deck building that goes inside of the game, not only just for that environment, but for the main game as well, as a little bit of coverage from the past regional that happened on July 15th, via Carded Magica being the host of it. So I guess the first thing is Carta Magica. We unfortunately don't have the full concrete data breakdown. Usually that comes in a couple of days after the recording of the podcast. But I do know what won, and I do know one other deck that ended up getting top 16. So as far as the deck that actually won, it was a brand new deck that was kind of shadow hidden in Japan, but Tessuro probably is the one who pioneered it, I'd say. There might be like a purple player's Digimon Discord. I know there's a black player's Digimon Discord that probably helped flesh it out to get it to the state that it currently is. But Lilith Loop Mill, or with Creepymon, or as people call it, Millith, that ended up taking the first spot. And then as far as one of the other top 16s, it was Red Hybrids, and I was the pilot. I placed 9th place with it. So there's at least 2 decks out of top 16. So we'll probably have more of that information and do like a big EX4 roundup for the launch of BT13.
Yeah, because, I mean, just currently right now, we just don't have the information. But, I mean, 2 of the decks is pretty solid.
I mean, it was a long event. It was around, I think the final number was like 406 players with, the event was sold out, obviously, but as far as what I read, participating, there was about 406 players. It was supposed to be scheduled for 9 rounds, but tiebreakers and whatnot and ties ended up cutting it around short. So it was actually 8 rounds, and I went 7-1. And my only loss of the event was to Hunters. So I had a pretty good and pretty strong showing, and so did the Creepy Loop player, which I actually did face a Creepy Lilith Mill Loop deck, and I didn't even understand what was going on, but I beat them in the face really hard with Red Hybrids to not even know what they were doing.
I mean, that makes sense. If you at least see the pieces you need, then it really doesn't matter if they mill the stuff. It just sometimes if they mill the cards you want, then it's like, oh, that kind of sucks.
I mean, I was watching a little bit of Tessero's stream when he was playing the event. I think he went like I think I stopped watching at about 4-3. So he wasn't doing super hot, but he said like, yeah, the deck does struggle with aggro, and if you can't get into ruin mode to basically stop the opponent from like literally playing the game for a whole turn, then
Just
it
lose.
does, yeah, you do just kind of lose. So it's not the greatest deck, but it is definitely something that's nice and creative and different. And he said that it is probably the most uninteractive deck in the entire game, more so than some other uninteractive purple/yellow decks.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess, yeah, it makes sense because you're not really doing anything to the bodies. All you're trying to do is just mill. You're not really trying to kill your opponent traditionally. I'm sure there are ways to do it, being that Guilmon and all that to get rush and that, but more often than not, you're just trying to mill them out, not give them a chance to really play the game by getting rid of the resources they need. Since a lot of decks don't really use stuff from the trash unless it's purple, but yeah, I assume Beelzemon probably wasn't doing too much this, since everybody's kind of off the bandwagon right now.
I didn't see a Beelzemon in my run. So just as a quick like I think my run kind of shows like where the meta for EX4 kind of was headed. I'm trying to pull it up here. Cuz there it is. Okay. So, round 1, I played against Blue Flare. Round 2, I played against Bloomlord. Round 3, I played against Millith. Round 4, I played against Hunters. Round 5, I played against Black War Greymon. Round 6, I played against War Greymon. Round 7, I played against Blue Flare. And round 8, I played against Hunter, with my round 4 Hunter being the only deck that I lost to. And the ironic thing was, I actually, surprise, know what placed 8th place. So I know 3 of the top 16 decks because the Hunter player I lost to got 8th place.
No,
So yeah,
that's funny.
I thought that was funny because I'm like, oh, how did my loss do? And then literally he was the person ranked above me, and I was just like, oh.
They're a little bit better, just a little bit.
Well, I mean, I think it's partially my fault. 1, for losing to the guy, and 2, making his record better because I was doing good. So
Yeah, undefeated up until that point. So yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, he must have lost to something. So
Yeah, otherwise he would have been higher.
right.
Interesting. I wonder what he lost to.
Yeah, but the fact that those were the decks that I played against showed that there probably is a decline in Beelzemon, and everything else kind of seemed pretty much expected. Like, I didn't, outside of my one encounter with Millith, I didn't really see a deck I wasn't unfamiliar with, and I think my meta call, because I knew that red hybrids currently realistically only loses to Machine Dramon and maybe a little bit of Black War Greymon if the game goes long enough. So as long as I'm able to out aggro them to make it so that getting to those stages don't matter because I would have already won the game, or B, just don't see them, it really kind of shows that it propelled in my performance. I'm not saying it's all strictly my opponent matchup. I obviously had to play well, because I did see a Black War Greymon and I did out aggro them, which was why in my deck list I was running for Atomic Infernos, was more so specifically for that type of a matchup, because I knew I needed to out aggro them and I couldn't do it without Atomic Inferno. So I prepped for seeing the worst. I didn't, and I just did well as a result.
I mean, yeah, that's really all you needed to do, I think. I mean, you also just played good throughout the whole day. I don't think you really played, even watching, because I watched, I think, probably 70% of your games. I think I only missed like 3. And, oh, it was funnily enough, the loss I missed, and then I missed 2 other games. But I don't think you really played bad. Like every decision you made, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, I see exactly where the line of play or the line of the thought process is going. So I don't think that definitely is a massive contributor.
I mean, it also goes into like reading the opponent's situations, because there were a couple of times where reasonably, like, I was counting how much damage I was theoretically missing off of some of my plays. I also was counting the amount of like important cards my opponent had. So like against the Bloom player, when they bot decked a Quartz off of like a Palmon search, I kept track of that, and I had dice off to the side of me to kind of keep track of what I was hoping not to see and what they didn't have access to. Because against the Wargrey player, there was a game where he bot decked both Hades Force, so I knew the likelihood of him running 3 Hades Force was very, very slim. So I was pretty much safe that entire game to do whatever I want, knowing Hades Force was not an option for him.
Yeah, see, that just comes with a lot of experience.
Yes, it definitely does. And like reading if the opponent is bricking and what they're not seeing based on what they're not doing, that also comes with experience, because there were certain moments where I was picking cards to control the opponent's field rather than beat the opponent's face in, because I knew they were stuck. If they didn't have anything, then they're just going to make an even worse play, which makes my plays better.
Exactly. Yep. I mean, can't say it any better. It's literally to a T how you should look at most matchups. Understand the matchup, understand what your deck's weak at, execute.
Yep, and I'm very happy that I was able to get my invite. The next opportunity I was actually anticipating, like if I didn't get it here, where I would have the next highest chance would probably be at Gen Con, because Gen Con has 2 days, one during Thursday, one during Friday, that would probably have some lower attendance. I think the cap was also lower, so it just that would have been the next easiest, in quotation marks, slot to be getting an invite opportunity. So wink wink nudge nudge if anyone's looking for that type of advice on trying to not only get a read on the meta, because that would be BT13. We would have had BT13 events leading into that, so we would know more about where the meta is, on top of the lower attendance making it slightly easier. But yeah, so I don't have to worry about that. And instead, I could actually have fun. I did peer in onto Tyler's stream and Max's stream. I believe Tyler, like GFG Tyler, he already has his invite. So he was just messing around with just testing different decks. And then I was peering into Max. I don't think he has his invite, but he might. I don't know. Um, but he was testing out Shine Greymon and trying to learn some of the more basic play lines that the deck currently has, so that way he could be more prepared leading into BT13, because I think that's the deck he wants to play in BT13.
That makes sense. I agree with it.
So yeah, the sweat is over. I can finally relax, and now you gotta follow.
I'm hoping. I'm trying to get like you.
Yeah, because I would like to meet you at Nationals. Nationals was a lot of fun last time. I know this time it's obviously going to be a lot smaller and more exclusive, but uh, like I met my previous partner Nako at Nationals last year, so it it's definitely going to be a lot of fun, and I hope you can make it.
Like I said, I gotta get good. That's all I gotta do. Can't wait. This week is just gonna be all practice, 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 practice. And
Yeah,
probably end up making some TTS stuff since I don't have any product yet, besides a little bit. But that's definitely not enough at the current moment.
yeah, because we both just came off of pre-release. So if you
Yes,
want
sir.
to talk about your pre-release experience, so that way we could kind of like get a good vibe on what your thoughts on the set in that sealed environment are, um, that would be definitely cool.
Oh man, this pre-release was a stall fest. Good lord, there's so many blockers in this set. Like, I don't know, like why they randomly were like, we're just gonna give everything blockers. But there's a lot of blockers, and there are a lot of big blockers in this set. So, like, Jumbo Gamamon is just king of pre-release. I don't think there was a better card in terms of pre-release. Just slamming level 5s and 4s is just absurd. Anytime your opponent decides they want to attack, like, it's a little much. I mean, I'll go ahead and say I went undefeated in my pre-release. It was pretty insane. I mean, I also did have 2 Gallantmon secret rares. Um, so it was very impossible for them to keep stuff on the board once I made it to the mid to late game. And I mean, I just got lucky with that. But I think playing with those big blockers and getting value from on plays and things like that is just it's super big, especially this like abusing Jumbo Gamamon, abusing um, some of this blockers. Like I got a bunch of SRs, which I mean, so like take mine with a grain of salt because you probably won't get as many. Maybe you do, but it's very likely you probably don't. From the packs I got, I think I got like 4 or 5 SRs. So it's like,
Jeez, I only
so
pulled
it's
two.
like, and mind you, 2 of my SRs were secret rares. So
Yeah, I only pulled two, and I traded one away because I was desperate for some EX4 cards because their prices aren't dropping as fast.
yeah, so It was a fun time. I enjoyed my pre-release. It was very good. I think I just got very lucky, and I pulled a lot of very powerful cards. The Craniumon option, very very good in this format. Comboed with Jumbo Gamamon, it's just absurd. Like it was
You took
absurd.
first, right?
I did, yes.
I didn't do as hot as you. I took second. I still got the Psychmon because my store gives prizing to first and second.
Nice.
So yeah, I only pulled two SRs. One of them I didn't even play because it was the Leopardmon Leopard mode. So I was just like,
Oh
cool, that
yeah.
card's useless
Okay.
in this type of environment. But my other one, that was a super hot card, which was Craniumon. As you mentioned, big
Mm-hmm.
blockers. I think literally out of all my mega lineup was literally Craniumon, two Bancho Leomons, Jumbo Gamamon, and then a Rosemon. Just because I knew there was blockers and I needed a way to suspend them so I could attack around them. They my mega lineup was pretty strong considering I had the Marcus Tamer and Samson. So that way I could just start generating lots of memory really quickly and I could outpace and outtempo the opponent at times, especially if I get into an early enough Bancho. Then I just had a decent amount of cards to support the blocker idea. So, like you were saying, it really was a stall fest. Like my first round, me and my opponent went to time. Obviously, it was a tie because we just stalled each other for quite a long time. He ended up winning game one because literally I decked myself out and he played the Kentorosmon option when I had zero cards left in my deck. Like it was such a brutal feeling knowing like yeah he just plays it and then he just wins because I can't do anything because I was lining up a big push attack turn to try to break through his wall of blockers and then he plays that and I'm like all right game two. So game two I just rush him down. Craniumon is absolutely broken when you get up into him really quickly in pre-release because I literally am just like yeah force that Digimon to attack, it's dead. Oh, my turn now? All right. Swing into
See ya.
security, reboot.
Yeah, it was. I'm telling you, Craniumon, Jumbo Gamamon, his option card, king of pre-release.
Oh,
Like,
so what I ended up doing is I sided in Lord Nightmon because I was so heavy onto Craniumon that like, oh, I have Craniumon Jumbo and Craniumon Lord Knight as like potential combos. So I'd be like, okay, Craniumon, force that Digimon to attack. Lord Nightmon, you lose 2 memory. Your Digimon is dead. Congratulations. And then Jumbo Gamamon, if that was on the field, or if it was on the field instead of Lord Nightmon, I would be like, okay, force your Digimon to attack, play Digimon with Jumbo Gamamon, block, kill your dude.
that's funny. Yeah,
Uh,
that's
yeah,
just
my deck
classic.
could not deal with level sevens though. I like level sevens are absurdly strong in this format because there's not a whole lot of answers. There is not.
No, not just from this. Like, you need to get one of the big option cards, but even then, that by the time you've got it, like you probably they've already gotten the damage out, and if you deal with it, they'll just clap back the next turn. So it's one of those like,
So,
like
one of my low key MVPs for the event, and I don't know how you feel about it, was actually Platinum Sukamon, just because the 3 cost level 4 is already cheaper than every level 4 in the entire set, and then the on delete D Digivolve let me deal with the opponent's high level Digimon. So that card, I had 2 of them in my deck. Super clutch card for this type of environment.
oh, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. That's just massive, dude. Like, I mean, mind you, I did get a lot of SR, so, but Rage Mode, Belphamon,
Oh my god,
that
Like
card ruined
Belformon's
shit.
yeah, Belformon Rage Mode is absolutely insane just because base 14k beats over almost every level 6 in the set because all of them are like at most 13k for some of them. And then just deleting stuff, like leaving that card on the field is like asking for trouble.
Yeah, exactly. It was hilarious. It was such a funny like sequence when I would go into like Craniumon, go into the thing. They were like, okay, let me just build wide, and then they would go wide, and then next turn I'd promote. throw a Belfam on rage mode, and they just lose end of turn. They're just like, oh, okay, that's unfortunate.
E-
It was really bad. Like I'm telling you, my pre-release was I don't want to say it was easy, but it was definitely not that bad. I steamrolled my pre-release.
Yeah, I obviously wasn't so lucky, but I still got the prize card, so that's good enough for me. Especially
Exactly.
since this set was super defensive. I think this was like thinking back about all of the other pre-releases. This is definitely the most super defensive heavy pre-release set, and I don't know if I exactly like it.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel. I'm definitely on the same boat. It was definitely really weird. Like it didn't feel like normal pre-release. This where like people were kind of just be very try to make the most aggro centric things, whereas this one was very very on the opposite end. Like a lot, it just promoted you just playing very defensive and not necessarily pushing unless you know you're just going to be able to kill your opponent.
Yeah, which is definitely different, but I think because of just the difference in main Digimon versus like sealed and limited, I definitely like more aggressive sealed and limited just because of the time constraint you're already under in that format compared to others. My store runs 45 minutes with 5 minutes of overtime. I know some like regionals and like other TOs follow that same type of suit. I know some run 50 or 55. It all just varies from the store, but I like the fact that I know that my games can actually end and I'm not going to go through my entire deck before it ends. Like there is just something more satisfying about faster games rather than just sitting there and just trying to basically build as wide as you possibly can and hope your opponent doesn't have an answer. It didn't feel very good compared to others.
Yeah, I agree there. I think it was not lame or boring or anything like that. It just wasn't as exciting.
Yeah, it's more thought inducive, not only just in the deck that you're trying to build, but thought inducive in how you're going to deal with answers and problems you normally can't.
Yeah, I think my gripe was everybody kind of had the same idea, and so a lot of the decks looked fairly similar.
I
And
mean,
that was like my problem because
I
like
mean,
I think
yeah.
everybody went with that. At least in mine. I don't know about yours, but like mine, everybody basically was like, "Yeah, we're just gonna stick with all the big blockers, and if they hit them, they hit them, and try and make something stupid off that, like make a impossible to deal with blocker stack." And then that was kind of the whole. That was your whole deck, basically.
Yeah, that definitely was the a ginormous sentiment because like my opponent in one of my games, he's just like, I literally don't have a better play, and I'm just gonna hard play this Queen Chessmon turn like 2 or 3 when he had a decent amount of memory to hard play that card, and I was just like, I couldn't capitalize on the fact that he gave me a whole bunch of memory, and then the fact that he had a big blocker out early on meant that I couldn't even aggress. So I was
You
just
couldn't
like,
chip them or
yeah, I
anything
couldn't
like
even
that.
chip him, and it felt so slow and painful, and just trying to come up with answers that just don't exist on how to take care of problems was way harder than it needed to be. Like that's why I valued like Examon and level 7s a lot. Which I mean I didn't pull any, but it would have been nice to have some because my opponents would get into a level 7, and if I literally didn't have Platinum Sukamon, I was kind of screwed. Like there was some DP reductions that I was relying on, but because we weren't attacking each other a whole lot, it actually took them way too long to be online to be effective with the Kentaro
Yeah.
spawn stuff.
See, like my pulls are just absurd. I did have one level 7, and that was Mirage Galgamon first, and that like I mean that was just absurd. Like like I said, my pre-release was absurd. Like I just had too much. I had everything, and there was just not much my opponents could do. like consistently getting into lines. The Mirage Galgamon option card was low key really good. Also, um, that card was actually like crazy good for
I think
pre-release.
an underrated card for this pre-release was the speaking of the Galgamon stuff, the mock Galgamon. Not being able to be blocked is huge, and I paired
Oh
that
yeah,
up. I was gonna pair that up with reboot, and then maybe if I had it, some DP pluses. So that's what I was trying to go for, and I didn't exactly get there, but I got close enough to where it's just like, okay, yeah, I see the value in that.
so I'm happy with it. It was fun. It just wasn't as fun as other pre-releases that I've been to. Um, which I mean is what it is. I mean, not every pre-release is going to be good. I think the card quality was a lot better, of course. Um,
Oh, the card quality was so much higher.
yeah, more. There was definitely more thought-provoking stuff in terms of like the lower end. Um, like going in with like I had some of the what are they called? The like the black cards to give reboot and all that other stuff, which is massive. There was like the who is it? Oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank.
Because I
It was
knew a lot of the
a
chess
green
bombs.
card.
Yeah,
For the
a lot of
green cards that reduced the evolution cost, that was massive. Those ones were big.
yeah. No, tempo was definitely a huge thing, and then just setting up your like it almost felt like the megas wanted to combo super hard with each other, and whoever had like the better mega first or the better combo first just seemed to be in a much better position if they didn't have a level 7 or an option to remove stuff.
Yeah,
But speaking of just creativity in deck building, obviously going off of a pre-release where you really have to be creative and find unique and interesting combinations of cards in order to make them super strong, and to try to help make you win. The winner of the regional, as we already mentioned, was Millith. Millith was a very unconventional deck that probably was never on anyone's radar until now, just because it won the Cartomagic Regionals. Right now, just because the regionals finished up relatively quickly, there was no coverage of it. A lot of people aren't really talking about it, and I think maybe when Eggman covers it eventually, whenever he gets the data from Carta, then I think a lot more people are going to be talking about that deck.
I think so. I think people. I mean, it's one of those decks that like I think right place, right time kind of thing.
I mean, I would never have thought of it. Like I didn't even know it existed even when I was playing against it. It was that's how far under the radar it was for me. Not like and I proclaim that I look at Japanese data and results and decks nonstop to try to get like a good baseline or foundation for my videos, and I had no idea still this even existed.
See, I have made a version of this deck a while ago, right when EX4 came out. I made a version of it, um, so I kind of have an idea of it. I had an idea. The minute you said it, I was like, "Oh yeah, that's cool." That's very. It's definitely one of those like obscure ones where it's it's definitely right place, right time. He picked the right event for it, and you have to play the deck very well. That's one thing for sure. Like you, it's very punishing if you make mistakes, and it's one of those decks. I mean, it's a purple deck. Purple decks are just they punish you at least if you're not unless you're playing Beelzemon, then that's a different story. But like most purple decks punish you very hard for playing bad. So like this one is very much on that front where if you're not making optimal plays more often than not, it's very likely you just lose out to your opponent because of just the amount of aggression that's in the format.
Yeah, like I was watching some of Tessuro's coverage on the deck just so I could get like an actual understanding because like I said, I had no idea I was even playing against it, and
Mm-hmm.
Tessuro was playing it in the event. He wasn't doing super hot on it. I don't know what his matchups were, but he did say that the deck really does struggle with aggro. He also kind of said that like this is probably a new level of uninteractivity when it comes to the game of Digimon, which is very scary at the same time. But I applaud the creativity that went into the build. I know that the Japanese build had stuff like training boost and stuff that we didn't exactly have, but I respect Tessero's deck building prowess because I know he's a very good deck builder, especially a very good purple player. And purple as a color has like a whole bunch of like interweaving cards that just mesh and meld together and allows you to create more interesting decks than most other colors in the entire game of Digimon. And the fact that he was able to formulate that deck and do well with that deck on top of someone else doing well with that deck definitely might put it more on people's radars now once it's well covered a little bit better.
Yeah, I think it's. I don't know if anyone really will pick it up. I doubt people will, to be 100% honest.
I think for
Maybe.
large events, it's like too big brain, and traditionally, big brain decks don't do well. Like, I almost want to say part of the reason why I did so well was because of how simple and straightforward my deck was. I just had to understand and read my opponent and try to capitalize it on it, like with the tools that I had available. And I think that purple decks being so intricate and complex, it will burn you out mentally faster, especially when rounds get to the later stages.
Yeah, that's a big factor that I don't think a lot of people take into consideration when they're like playing a deck. How much mental fatigue you take throughout an event. Like it doesn't seem like you would be that draining because you're just playing a card game and sitting down. But there's a lot of mental gymnastics that goes into playing these, and there's definitely a lot of mental fatigue if you're not used to doing it often. Even the players that are used to doing it, I mean, you're sitting in a place for what? You were played there for 8 hours, 7, 8, 9 hours around that ballpark, and it's like that's pretty hefty of a time sink, and that does wear on you, especially you're going into these events. Maybe your mental isn't that great when you're going in, and you're going back and forth. Maybe you win a game, lose a game, win, lose, and you're just like that gets to you. So like playing easier decks, of course, I wouldn't say easier. Let's just say more simple decks tends to, alleviate a lot of that stress. But like playing like Millith, that's stressful as it can be because of how punishing the deck is.
Well, because also one small miss up and
Your
things
whole
can start
turn is
spiraling
done.
absolutely crazy out of your control. Like when I was facing it, I didn't even know what the deck was because I beat it that fast. And I didn't know that the deck had a problem with aggro. I just knew I wanted to punch really hard. And it didn't take a lot of like mental fortitude for me to one, not care about what my opponent was doing, or understand. Because I even had to ask him like, so what actually is your deck? Because I think it's like, because I literally told him I'd like to solve the answer on what your deck is because I don't know. And is it like Creepy Loop? And he was just like, yeah, that's pretty much it. And I was just like, oh, I didn't realize people were trying to play that. But because I didn't see a mega. I saw it when I hit his security and Lilithmon showed up in his security and I beat over it, obviously.
Yeah.
But I had zero idea what was going on, and he actually accidentally fed my win condition because he milled me to have enough hybrids in my trash to like,
warp.
yeah, to literally be like, yeah, here's a turn 2 Emperor swinging for 3 checks. Can you deal with that? No. Okay.
No, not in that deck. Not in that deck.
I mean, he could have had a removal, but he didn't have enough cards in his trash to really like actually use a good removal.
I was like, even if he does the removal, okay,
Plus
that's
the funny
fine.
plus the funny thing was I was actually taking away cards from my trash, so it made it significantly worse on his part when he's just like, yeah, we both need to have this total, and now you're putting me off of that while I'm feeding you. I was just like, okay, this is just a good deck. Like again, that goes into like my choice in terms of like meta matchup, but I do appreciate the level of creativity purple players can have with coming up with some of the absolute most wild stuff. I think the color, like the second best color that has the most creative flexibility is probably black. I've seen some pretty intricate black decks. I think like Tyler was trying to play this weird Ragnar list during this regional. I know that some people substituted the Omnimon for the like
Yeah, the
Omnimon
Ragnar.
DNA deck with Ragna. So like you could have a decent amount of creative flexibility in purple and in black too. I think other colors, some of them are a little bit more bankrupt than others. I think red is probably the most creatively bankrupt uh, compared
Yeah,
to
the
every
red
other color in the
shoehorn.
game.
I think most of the archetypes are very one-dimensional, so it makes sense.
Yeah, blue kind of is that way. Blue has a little bit more creative freedom, but not that much. Blue only gets it because of the fact that blue has been supported by multiple different color pairings. Because you have literally blue black, you have blue yellow, you have blue green. Like there's just a lot of multicolor blue stuff, and then red literally is just red black. That is it. Maybe red purple, but that
Yeah, but that stuff's better for purple really than red.
correct. So, like, red is probably the most color bankrupt. I think, like, green has some pretty okay stuff, but it's mostly because one archetype is really getting a lot of support, and that's Bloomlord.
Yeah, I think Bloomlord is like always going to be the winner of green for the most part.
I mean,
Like,
insects had something going with it. And then same with hybrids. Like, there's some decently creative stuff you could do with that. And then they kneecapped Grandis, so that's no longer as viable of an option. And it's in that zone of adapt or die, and I think people are just willing to let it die rather than adapt.
yeah, I think we're past it now, and people are just done with it. They're ready to move on to the next thing. Even though they're still playing Bloomlord.
I mean, hey, with Bloomlord, you are getting the Rosemon stuff. Even though the Rosemon stuff isn't like directly interacting with Bloomlord, you could still use a lot of those tools for Rosemon to be able to support a Rosemon based deck, which I think is really cool. Black, you have Craniumon with black blockers trying to make a comeback and blockers as a mechanic, on top of just a whole bunch of other like really wild and crazy stuff you could try to mix together, like Ragnarlordmon and Omnimon. Then we've seen before Alphamon playing with Greymon tools because of the X antibody stuff. So like there's a decent amount of like mixing that could happen for some more creative and exciting decks. And that's the part like I really like about Digimon is even though it is a heavy archetype based game, we still can have the ability to build like good just general monocolored decks that take a little bit of a lot of different stuff and try to make something new and different out of it.
Yeah, I think at the moment, at least, there's a lot more creativity in that regard. I think if we went back a few sets, it really wasn't that creative. There was some stuff, but it wasn't too much. But as of course, I mean that's just natural. As we get more stuff, more cards, more archetypes that kind of bleed into each other, there's more ways to uh, mix and match and do things like that. So I like where the game is going currently. There's just a lot of good, especially with this set. I like it a lot.
Oh, I love this set.
This set
So
is super fun.
yes. So going back to creative deck building, there is creative deck building in budget constraints. So the fact that something like Examon, which was a relatively inaccessible deck, now is getting a rare that you can play with the rest of the stuff that came out in EX3 makes the deck suddenly cheap and viable. Because like, oh, I don't feel like paying $20-$30 for a set of secret rares, and the secret rares are like the heart and lifeblood of the deck, so I can't play the deck without it. But now I have a rare option that turns like a $120 deck down to probably something more reasonable, like sub 50 at this point, just because a lot of the Examon stuff is like what rares and below from EX3 with a couple of cards
Yeah.
splashed in. Like that's absolutely crazy to think that we have that level of budget flexibility. Even though it's not going to be as strong, the fact that you could still play it is still something. I know blue flares with the new Metal Greymon, even though you cannot use the red, that's fine because it still gives you a base Metal Greymon that you could use, because I think the current one's like $10. So spending $40 for just to start with the deck, I know is a little off-putting for some, because I know the rest of the deck outside of that is like dirt cheap. But now you could build an even cheaper version, and that just makes it the game more accessible as a whole when you know what the smart substitutions are for the expensive cards that we actually do have replacements for.
I didn't really think about it like that, but yeah, that's really honestly true. I mean, these are, I don't want to say inferior options, but they kind of are. Like the
I
Examon
mean,
is definitely nowhere near as good as the other Examon for sure. But
same thing with the Metal Greymon. Like, you're not stunning, but like depending on how you build your deck behind that budget constraint, like you
you can
you're
make it work.
locked. Yeah, you can make it work. Like, you're locked out of red, but you have more blue stuff, and then that gives you the space to run stuff like Decker, so that way you could at least still have some stun potential. So like it's just the fact that the availability is becoming there is definitely super nice.
Yeah, I think it's more than enough, and stuff like that. Getting, I mean, secret rares, like especially Examon, because even Examon is very good, like the secret rare, but like I don't know if it's worth secret rare money. So it's like, it's definitely super cool that now we can just pick up a rare that essentially, I mean, it kind of does the same. It's just not as good. There's a little bit more caveats to it, but it's not bad. Like it's not. It's a good enough replacement to where you could make it work.
And I
And
think this is coming at a really good time, because at the end of what, September, is when we're getting the reprint set, which granted the reprint set is like only the greatest hits from sets 1 through 5, so basically block 0. But the fact that a lot of staples, like good generic cards that we're still using even today, are getting reprinted again just helps lower the accessibility. I'm not going to go super heavy into the set because I personally don't need the reprints, but if I'm looking at some of like the more specific cards, the fact that they're dropping in price because these reprints are happening make it way more appealing to just want to get into the game, buy up extra copies for all of the other decks that I would be building, so on and so forth. And
oh yeah,
and then we have more starter decks, which the demo decks are mostly the starter decks. Again, just lowers the accessibility. I think, like, depending on how they distribute the demo decks to stores, because right now it's just a Gen Con exclusive thing, and then eventually stores will get it. Like, it does kind of ruin the product because you literally get the best evolution line, which is what most people are looking out of the deck anyway, along with the tamers and the options. Like, all there just again is super nice in terms of just again lowering the barrier of entry and giving players a starting point to be able to start building decks out of.
interesting. Very interesting. I mean, I think we're in a good spot. I think Digimon is in a healthy spot. There's a lot of cool stuff that can be bled into other decks, and I like that a lot. I think a good card game will allow for creativity in all aspects, not just the purely from just a gameplay perspective, like actually building decks. I mean, this is that's the lifeblood of a card game in general, is not just building a deck and making it work. So making like interesting combinations and things like that is super super cool. Um, and I think we're getting more and more unique. At least the game is getting more and more interesting with more ways to do so.
I definitely think so, because I know we're getting the like update pack a little bit later than what I would have liked. I know like the update pack with the Destromon, the Saberdramon, um, there's a Zudamon in there. Like that update pack I know is coming in EX5.
Hmm.
I Bandai's always had a promo problem. Like we're missing a bunch of promos that we don't know where and when they're going to be, and like outside of that, just the fact that I still like the fact that they're going back to some of those decks to try to update them, even though yes, some of these updates could be a little bit more meaningful and they probably need a lot more work and attention. Just the fact that hey, we remember those is still just a nice gesture, even if the deck isn't going to try to be competitive. And I think not all decks are designed to be competitive, and that is totally fair and valid. It goes into like, oh, why is draft filler never used in constructed play for like stuff like Magic the Gathering? Well, it's because it's draft filler. It's not supposed to be constructed playable. Like there's obviously going to be better things to play, and that's the point of card analysis is we design cards to be bad on purpose so we can show you what good cards actually look like.
Interesting. I mean, it's hard sometimes to think about that stuff because you don't really think about it like that when you're like just playing the game naturally. And I mean, if you're not really like a super hardcore looking deep into the game, there's not that those thoughts really don't come into play. But looking more like from an analytical standpoint and just trying to understand why they do things, especially with like the promos and things like that, like how for some unknown reason we're behind on those promos and there's really no good reason for it. It's kind of just like they just didn't give it to us yet. We're going to get them eventually. I just think the thing that's bad about that is we won't get them when it's relevant, when they're relevant when they come out. So they'll be fairly irrelevant cards when we get them, which sucks. But I
Yeah,
mean,
I think if
it is
they
what it is.
yeah, they have done it correctly a total of one time. I could count on one hand, and I know the one instance that it was actually released on time. And that was in BT4. There was the Great Legends update pack, which for Japan came out in BT5, and for them it was way too late because they've already moved on to the next set of decks. Just because the game was still early on in its infancy, and like obviously it's not necessarily a power creep thing, but like just the development and building blocks of the games. Like okay, obviously while the game is developing still and finding its true identity, the next set is obviously going to be a little bit more powerful in terms of the decks that we're going to be playing with. But the fact that we got our update pack in BT4 correctly for the BT4 decks, it felt very good. And I wish that they would go back to doing it like that, where it's just like, hey, we know what decks are going to be playable when, or when they're more relevant. So, like, I think we needed the update pack we're getting in EX5, which is what, November or later? Um, I I don't even remember.
I think it's like near the end of November. Yeah.
Yeah. No, November is BT14, so it's actually next year. So
Oh my
that's
god.
yeah,
Wow.
that's
Yeah.
even worse.
It's like early next year.
But the fact
Oh,
that they
that's
knew something like, oh, Royal Knights is struggling, Birds is trying to be relevant, but it's not there quite yet. Like they knew that we needed those cards earlier, and they could have easily said, hey, we're gonna just have this box topper, like the Great Legends Dash Pack, basically was a pseudo box topper, and we are going to make sure that players can get these cards when they're actually relevant. We've missed the ball a couple of times. I think like, what was the last one? The last one was with like was Boutmon, Greymon, Sagittarius, where Garurumon, Sagittarius. I think if we got those in BT9, it would have been a little bit more relevant for some of those decks. But the fact that we keep getting these promos late is like so far the only like big complaint that I have with the game in terms of like how they're treating it for us.
Yeah, like we got the security rookies super late, and then those were like super anticipated cards, and they were actually fairly used in the Japanese meta um, during when they were supposed to be released. So whereas we didn't get to use them, so now they're basically dead cards, and it kind of sucks. Just because I thought they were fairly cool cards, but I mean, what can we do? I mean,
Yeah,
there's not
because
really much we can do about it. Like we can't rush them because they're not going to do it, nor would they care.
I
Um,
think in Japan at this point, they already had the reprint set. Granted, ours got delayed because they actually weren't going to be reprinting cards, but that's a different story for a different time. Um, but like the fact that they already had all of the Gamamon and the Ghost Games characters decks, like they already had them before our BT13, and then all of the promos they had before BT13 or during BT13, like the memory or not memory, training cards. Those are huge. Like that's meta defining. At least the training cards. The Ghost Game cards is kind of hit and miss because those decks are kind of like they never really did anything. But the fact that they were still a thing that people had to think of, definitely was like a meta changer. Whether we acknowledge that they were actually meta decks or not is something completely different. But like it does change the environment in which we play. And like I know a lot of people are pushing for like, oh, if we are just this different, why don't we have different ban and restriction lists? And I'm like, well, it's because the problems are all the same. It doesn't necessarily matter how we're playing the game. It's just the problem is still the same between the different languages.
yeah, it makes no difference for the most part. The
Yeah, a
problem is what
broken
we
card
don't.
in Japan is still going to be a broken card in America, and a broken card in America is still a broken card in Japan.
It's just a matter of when we see it. That's really the gist of that. So it's such a weird, that's such a foreign concept to me. Like how people will be like, well, we should have separate ban lists, but it's like kind of why? Like we have the same, we're behind in terms of cards, but aside from that difference, like they should be following roughly the same ban list. I don't see why it matters that they're a set or two ahead, which they're, I mean, a few sets ahead of us, but um, it's it's not a big deal. I don't get why that's a massive deal to people, but maybe I just don't see it, and it's not that big a deal to me. But I don't know. I mean,
I think it's because we can abuse stuff more. Because we play technically more games than Japan does, because a lot of Japanese meta, not all of it, but a lot of it, is best of ones. They are small local scenes. They're not these ginormous 500 people tournaments or 400 people tournaments. Even in like smaller regions or like other territories, like still just a 100-person tournament is larger than most things that Japan is going to do anyway. So I think it's like that kind of sentiment where it's just like we're really putting these cards and like putting them to the test, stretching the limits and boundaries of them way more than what's possible in Japan and can be reflected in Japan and their particular meta. Like with Lilith Loop or Millith Loop now. My brother, actually, he made a comment where he's just like, so why do they keep banning cards around the problem and instead just get rid of the problem? Like, if they would have just banned Lilithmon, then I don't necessarily think Cerberusmon would be that much of a problem. I mean, granted, there's more things that could abuse Cerberusmon as a whole, and I do think Cerberusmon is, like, it's not ban worthy, but it's something to look out for, which obviously is why it's on their list for Ultimate Cup, but I digress. Like, the fact that some cards might just be that problematic where they are ban worthy sometimes just don't get banned.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense. I think someone in chat said something interesting. I think the problem is, for example, we only had Crossheart full power for 1 month, while Japan had it for a longer time. Now, I want to rebuttal this with a question. Did you want to deal with full power Crossheart? Like, I don't know if you ever got to see that deck at full power, but that was not very fun to play against.
No,
Like,
and I think like the style of deck like Security Control and Millith, like these like big do nothing decks for the vast majority of the game, and then like the game
Kill
just
you.
is over and you didn't even realize it. Like I'm not a huge fan of those either. Like granted, I played Red Hybrid and I beat people in the face, but like I lost because I got out tempoed. I can lose because I can get outplayed, and if they have a good defensive state, I could just lose because I can't get around their defense. Like I think like Red Hybrids for me is like the epiphany of what a fair Digimon deck is, which is really awkward to say considering it's using hybrids, which is one of the most unfair mechanics because there's still just not a whole lot of widespread tamer interaction. Um, but in terms of like what it's actually doing, I'm not cheating on tempo. I'm not cheating on memory most of the time outside of Boko and the warp. And maybe the level 5, but there's a lot of level 5s that could evo for 1, so it's not even that bad at this point. Um,
Yeah, I don't think that's really that bad.
so, like, it is just to in my perspective like the standard of the most fair deck because I was playing against hunters and hunters literally if they have a field of tamers they could just outpace anyone and they have a level of responsiveness to be able to interact with the opponent out of thin air. Like give them 3 memory because they have their memory setter already up, and they can do whatever the heck they want if they have enough tamers on the field. And I'm just like, this
Yeah.
feels very silly and it's very strong. Cross does something very similar. Like there's a lot of decks that just try to do these like cheat on the game type things, and that's why like some of those decks are actually super meta. But like that's part of why um certain cards get limited is because like maybe this is just too good, and cross for that was like specifically cross 4 was just too good.
Like you have to just look at the card in a vacuum because yes, for us, we didn't get to enjoy Crossheart at full power. We had it for what, a week, I think.
It was like a week to a month. Like we also had this with HPD where we had HPD going into what I think it was BT4. Like we had 1 week where that was legal, and I didn't want to experience Saris lockdown control. Like that sounded absolutely miserable.
Yeah, oh my god, dude, that's a core memory. Saris lockdown control, man.
Yeah, let me just Digizorb, use your stuff to pay for my stuff, and then just swing over it, and then good luck playing the game.
See the thing. Okay, this is very interesting. Um, Part of the block slash limited is for acknowledging the meta. The other is business based. If we had full power cross going to nets, would anyone have played anything but cross and black or gray? Exactly. See,
Yeah,
this is what we mean. We're like,
no, like they're smart decisions because the broken card is the broken card. It doesn't matter what format it's in.
because taking out Crossheart allowed other decks to thrive. Not only black or gray, but we had in that meta there was like 3 or 4 decks
I mean,
that
and
could compete.
even like going back to BT12 metadata, like we have the data for pre Black War and post Black War, and obviously post Black War's nerf on the BT11 Greymon X antibody, it's definitely slowed down the deck enough to let other decks actually be playable.
So sometimes it may seem unwarranted, but you also have to remember, like in the case of X4, X4 borderline killed the Japanese meta. Like I know so many people that were saying they literally didn't play. They were just like, "No, I'm good.
I
I
mean,
don't want to play."
the funny thing is, people will always cry when a card theoretically kills the deck. It's just like, oh, how do I play Cross Hearts without Cross 4? It's borderline unplayable. Like there's
That's
nothing
not true.
there. And I'm just like, no, like you're not
That,
looking at the bigger picture. And
the
it's
deck
just like,
didn't need
yes,
cross 4.
yeah, like it is a good card. It does accelerate the deck to an ungodly amount and speed and tempo, especially for that time in the game's development. But like the deck is still playable. Like I know Marcus is like the big contention point where Shine is still doing really good in Japan. Shine was the big boogeyman in BT13. And like I know there's a lot of talk on if Marcus is going to hit because of Ultimate Cup. I don't necessarily think that hit is going to be coming soon. I think that hit is probably going to be coming, like, if it is, like, if anything is going to get hit, I think that's going to be coming more around the time frame of, like, the fall transition. That just seems like that would be the appropriate time to do it when we're about to get, what, the starter decks and, yeah, the starter decks come out in October. So yeah, like November-ish, like when we're about to get BT14, that's plenty of time for Japan to see if Marcus and Shine is still a problem. And I don't even know if, like, by that point Marcus does get outdated. I don't think he does, but we really get to see and examine where the problem with that deck is. If it is Marcus, and if it is Marcus thanks to the Ultimate Cups, we get to see, like, is the deck still playable and manageable even without that tool being at full power? And personally, I think it is, just because we do have other ways to turn Marcus online. The free evolution to me is always the most backbreaking thing. I hate it when they do free evolution and they do it so often. It's kind of disgusting. But considering almost half of the problems have been through cheap or too cheap of evolutions, when it comes to their bans and limits. So that part just absolutely baffles me that they keep doing that. But I digress. And like, I don't know exactly, like, you have to take a step back and look at the bigger picture on, is the deck still playable? Even if it's not meta playable, is the deck still playable? And, like, can you still put new tools in to not necessarily replace the old tools, but to shift and change the deck in a meaningful way?
Yeah, basically, is there tools to compensate for the loss? More often than not, yes, there is.
I mean, Alphamon has done it. If anything, Lychee King has pioneered.
Proven that
Yes,
you can do it just
he
fine.
multiple times. He's an alpha god in my perspective. Like, he's one of the best black players, and he has had the most success on Alphamon when nobody else has, because he's the only one testing it to see if Alphamon is still viable, and shocker, it is. And I think that's part of a bigger problem with Digimon is there's a ton of playable decks that are probably meta that we're not even looking or thinking about.
Correct. I think people just don't want to experiment that deep more often than not. More often than not, they'll go with the deck that everyone is saying is going to be a tier one contender. Like, when we come into this format, guarantee we're going to have a million Shine Gray players, which is fine. I mean, the deck is absurdly strong. So, of course, I could see why there's nothing wrong with you saying, I want to play Shine Greymon in this format. But it does end up bleeding into this weird circumstance where these people have weird views on the game because they don't experiment, and they're just like, well, Shine Gray is ruining the game. It's like, well, have you tried to play decks that can beat it, that deal with the deck? If the answer is automatically no, or, well, why would I when it's the best? That means you haven't tried. And you haven't tried to make something that can deal with it. Now, if you get to the conclusion that after you tried that you cannot, then there's a problem. Then you can be like, okay, this is undoubtedly the best player whatsoever. Best deck in the form whatsoever. But more often than not, there's bound to be something that you can do to play against X deck, XYZ deck. Hence, people, when Beelzemon was coming out, people were dropping Dark Knightmon and things like that because of the niche interaction of being able to actually be able to deal with Beelzemon decks and things like that. So it's like, or Lychee coming first with his Alphamon list out of nowhere after the ban list. So it's like, if you take the time and learn matchups and do it, you can find stuff. I'm sure that it's there. Of course, that requires you to take the time and do some effort, which is fine. I mean, some people aren't going to want to do that. Some people just want a net deck and get their wins, or try and get their wins that way, which is, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But it's hard when people that only net deck and don't actually create their own decks go in and say things like that, because then it's like, well, did you actually even really try? Did you actually do anything that would say warrant you saying these things? And more often than not, the answer is no. And then it's just like, well, you're allowed to have an opinion. No one's saying your opinion is invalid, but it's kind of hard to, or I'm more often than not, I'll look at your statements with a grain of salt if you're just playing with net decking in mind.
Part of me,
Not that it's a problem, but
yeah, part of me, like, this is kind of why I wish we had the reprint set sooner, or at least just the new cards, because the Jellymon stuff, like, I remember when we were like the Japanese players in the Facebook were starting to complain about Shine Greymon and how to deal with it. And they were thinking of all of the ways to interact with Marcus in the very limited capacity. And somebody was just like, yo, Jellymon. Jellymon is the way to go. To be, like, if you want to have a good win rate into Shine Greymon, play Jellymon. And because Jellymon is one of the few decks that actually does bounce and interact with Tamers, so it's hard for them to delete their Marcus when, or like swing with their Marcus when it doesn't exist because it's in their hand, and they can only replay it so many times before they actually have to just hard slam it, and then they're losing a lot of value because they're hard slamming it. So, like, that's kind of where some of the meta shifts and differences come in, because, like, even against hunters, like, just bounce their hunters back to their hand, bounce their tamers back to their hand, and the deck starts to fall apart because now they're going to have to spend alternative resources replaying those that they don't necessarily have because they already spent the investment to do it once before. And that's the level of experimentation that I think isn't necessarily the, like, a lot of people are pioneering. Some people are, obviously, like Tessero and Millith, and the success of that deck at this regional, which is always nice to see, but it's not necessarily always the case. But that's the beast of Digimon. It's just, there is a lot of creativity, there is a lot of skill in terms of, like, learning matchups, learning how to play, understanding decks, but that's just the fun of actually participating in a TCG and being a part of that discussion, is so that way you could actually get that feel and that conversation and discourse.
Interesting. I mean, I couldn't have said it better, to be 100% honest. It's such an interesting thing. We're in a cool state of Digimon, and I just don't want people to think negatively about things when I think Digimon is on the up and up when it comes to card design and things like that. So I'm overly excited.
Yeah, card design, set design, accessibility. I think Digimon is going to be in a really good state. All they really need to do is just fix organized play and the pricing behind it, and I think they're golden.
Borderline perfect. Borderline perfect.
I mean, maybe figure out a way to incentivize people to play more in stores, because I have noticed like, just a lot of people don't necessarily have the places to play, probably because the store either tried supporting it and didn't work out and they'll just sell you the product, or the scenes are too small. Whatever the reasons are, I wish that there was more of an incentive to actually play in person. Part of it might be they just need to run more in-person events, so that way it gets that generation of, like, wanting to play in person going. But outside of that, like, the game as a whole, as a game, is very good in its current state. I know there's a lot of questionable things, but I think the direction is definitely more positive in terms of just what the game is trying to do, the identity it's carving for itself, and the mechanics and interactions that just proceed with it. I think that it is definitely one of the best TCGs on the market currently, and it looks like it's only getting better and easier to be able to pick up and play.
I 100% agree. I think we're in a good spot. There's very little complaints that I have regarding the game as a whole.
Yep, and on that note, this is the part where I want to thank everyone for listening to the podcast as we are closing the show. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast and the various platforms it's on, please share with others on social media and leave a rating, follow, review, subscription, all that social media stuff to try to like get the generation and the viewership up. It really does mean a lot. And I want to thank everyone again, and I will see you, or will see you, in the next episode.